What up y'all? The title says it all, but I did want to mention the inspiration for this video was this video that popped up in my feed, and not only was the video amazing by a smaller channel no less, but it made me want to do something similar. I already do journaling, so just writing down my thoughts and things that happened that day, and I've been doing that for over 6 years now, I think. Video games are a huge part of my life, and I'm honestly a little mad at myself that I haven't done this sooner. I'd love to 5 years from now go back and see what I thought about these games, but you can't change the past, so what better time than to start now. Editor Relit here. I realized that even though I tried to cut like 90% of the Rebirth stuff, so the whole video wasn't just a Rebirth essay, it still kind of turned into the main thing. So sorry about that, but I think it just goes to show you how much of an impact this game had on me this year. Also, spoilers. Alright, back to the video. I play most of my games on PlayStation, and unfortunately I don't have exact dates for everything, but I'm like 95% sure I at least got the order right. So to explain what I started playing this year, I'm actually going to have to take you back to 2018. Because without this series of events, me playing these games and making this video might never have happened. So what does 2018 have to do with this past year of gaming for me? In 2018, a cool little game called Super Smash Bros. Ultimate came out. The only Smash game I had played at the time was Brawl on the Wii, and I was beyond hyped to play this new one. It's actually the only reason I got a Switch. So Smash comes out, I'm playing my main, Lucina, because I love Fire Emblem, and they dropped the reveal trailer for Joker. I knew from the second I saw him he was going to be my main. His gameplay looked crazy, and when he dropped he was my main and stayed my main the whole time I played. I think at the time I wanted to try the game he was from, but it was on PlayStation only, and I was an Xbox kid, so I just let it be. Fast forward to I think March of 2020, the restaurant I worked at closed down because of COVID. And now with no job and a lot of time on my hands, I see a launch trailer for Persona 5 Royal. Immediately I recognized my main Joker, and the game looked pretty good, so I decided to trade in my Xbox and get a PlayStation specifically to play this game. And it was worth it, great game. So now that I have a PlayStation, I started checking out PlayStation related things like exclusives, showcases, the state of plays, all the good stuff. I think a month passes by and I'm looking at YouTube, and I think like a content creator was reacting to the launch trailer or something, and I see Cloud in the thumbnail, who I recognize from Smash, and the gameplay looks crazy. At the time I just remember thinking this is like the prettiest game I've ever seen. I get the game and play it, and it became my favorite game of all time. Mind you, I never played the original. The only FF game I'd ever played was Crystal Chronicles on the DS, I think it was called, and I never even finished it. So I finished Remake, and I'm obviously very confused. I start looking up stuff to help me understand, and then, spoiler alert, I learn that Aerith dies, and I'm like, damn, that sucks. And then I read a little more, and I realize she dies like only halfway through the game. And then who is the guy with Cloud at the end? And then I learn he's supposed to be dead, and then I learn the game is supposed to be a sequel, not like a actual remake.
Then somebody tells you Sephiroth is from the future. And you're like, what? Excuse me? Like, Sephiroth is Advent Children's Sephiroth. He's going back to Final Fantasy VII, Thanos style, to stay alive because he knows he's going to die. And you're like, you've now reached level 2. What? Excuse me?
So now I'm thinking I don't want to learn anymore and decide to play the original FF7. Anyways, so back to beginning of this year, and actually a little before, I think around November 2023, I decided to start replaying Crisis Core, the OG, watch Advent Children, play Remake, and watch theory videos to get me prepared for Rebirth. I'm being so serious when I say I calculated how many hours the games, movie, theory videos I wanted to watch and rewatch would take, and planned how many hours I needed to devote to this a day to be on time a little before Rebirth release. Of course I got way too into it and finished early, so I think in like late January I decided I wanted to do something that wouldn't take me more than maybe like a month to beat, because I don't really like to play more than one like main single player game at a time. And my answer to that was to play the Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores DLC. Visually it was stunning. I had beat Forbidden West earlier in 2023, and while I enjoyed enjoyed it. This was the game that made me realize I was a bit burned out on open worlds. And unfortunately, the same was for the DLC. I did the main story and side quests, but little to no exploration. And the story was good. I think the mystery of Zero Dawn's story, before you know what's really going on, had me way more invested than this time around. But I think the main game progressed a lot of things forward in a good way, and the DLC had a solid story. And finally, we were able to fight the thing everyone who played the first game has been waiting to fight. Also, a little side note for anyone who played Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, is it just me, or was Forbidden West like 10 times harder? And I don't mean just like the bosses, I mean basic enemies. Like, listen, I'm pretty good at a lot of video games. Like, I'm just a gamer. But when I tell you this game beat my ass so many times, I actually felt like on a biological, cellular level, I did not understand how the game worked. And mind you, the first game was fine. No issues or dark thoughts. It was just Forbidden West, and the same was for the DLC. Just got my ass beat and got through it. Alright, and with that little detour over, now comes the highlight of the year for me, and probably one of the last games I will ever get truly excited and passionate about for. So Rebirth releases. It was the first game I've ever bought a collector's edition for, and if I had the money, I would absolutely buy the collector's edition for Remake from eBay or somewhere. It arrives in the mail, I load it up, and immediately we're thrown into the Zack scene, which was not part of the demo. That really set the tone for the whole game for me. And let me caveat this by saying they could absolutely ruin everything depending on where Zack's story goes and how it influences everything in Part 3. Also, I'm hoping it'll be called Remember. But I am a huge fan of what they've done in Remake and Rebirth, and I like where I think the story's going. Gameplay wise, it's just a crazy improvement on what I already thought was the greatest combat system I've ever played. The story, as I've already said, I'm here for it. I think they'll do it justice in Part 3. The side quests were just as good as the main story in my opinion, and while the actual objective of the side quest itself might not be that complicated or complex, I think the actual greatness of the side content is the character interactions. And yeah, I'm probably biased because I'm so invested into the world and the characters, but to see what the developers did with all the characters is, and I mean in every sense of the word, just perfect to me. There was no missteps, except maybe one character. I'll talk about him later. However, no game as a whole is perfect, but I do disagree with a lot of the criticisms I see online. One being there's too much fluff or bloat. I just disagree. Yes, it's a long game with a ton of optional content, but like I said earlier, what I think makes all the extra stuff great is the characters and how they're explored and progress in everything you do. Too many minigames. They're definitely on the spectrum of how good they are, but I think a lot of it comes down to personal preference, and I mean they're literally optional. Even the one that has a whole dedicated chapter to it can be skipped by declining to participate. Chadley is the one I will say is fair. I can see how he could get annoying fast to people. I definitely don't think he's a great addition to the story, but I don't think it's as bad as I've seen people make it out to be. Like, there's this YouTuber I watch regularly say they quit Rebirth because of Chadley, and I don't know, that's just crazy to me. Some of my personal grievances with the story are how Sid seems to be almost like a character betrayal. We don't go to Rocket Town, so we don't see his personal story yet, and maybe I'm wrong about him seeming like a different character, but I'm just not a fan of fundamentally changing a character or things in general. And yes, I know it seems contradictory because Remake and Rebirth change huge things, but then I'd argue we still see and go through 95% of the story the exact same way. And I think that and, changing a character are two fundamentally different things, especially in the context that this seems to be a sequel, not an actual remake. Anyways, I can already see that half this video is going to be about Rebirth, so the last thing I'll say is my only real personal grievance with the game is that my prediction was wrong. We learned in interviews before the release that the game would end at the Temple of the Ancients. I fully convinced myself that after Aerith died, she would wake up in Zack's timeline, explain things to him, and then we would basically go through the world again through Zack's perspective, fighting with him and Aerith. I was a bit disappointed that it felt like we barely used and saw him. Editor Relit here again. There's so much I can say about everything to do with this game, but I've already cut like 90% of what I wanted to say, and this part still feels too long, so let's just end it here. And just when you thought I would finally be done talking about Final Fantasy, surprise, there's more. I was so excited after finishing Rebirth, I decided I needed to play another FF game, so I played 8 Remastered. I thought the setup and beginning of the story is good. I'm a huge fan of Squall and Sephir, however you pronounce his name, and they're kind of like Naruto Sasuke relationship. I wasn't really a fan of the junction system. I mean, I give it like a 10 out of 10 for ingenuity and being unique, but having to lose stats to use a spell that I wanted to use didn't sit with me well. The balance and choice you have to make as a trade-off is super compelling, but it just didn't really click with me. Triple Triad, I'm not even gonna say anything. If you know, you know. Okay, I lied. I will say one thing. The fact that you lose one of your cards if you lose the match makes it so much more compelling and perfect than it already is. Having those stakes is awesome to me. Only downside is it took me forever to understand all the different rules. I had to YouTube it, and even then it still took me a while and I didn't fully get it. Now the end of the story is where it gets insanely hyped for me. It's amazing in its own right, but my headcanon theory, and yes, we're going back to FF7. So my headcanon theory is that all the concepts they introduced in the end are either what they wanted to do to continue the FF7 story, or that these concepts in 8 are what inspired the re-trilogy. Ultimacia's time loop, or I guess it's actually like time compression. When I first saw it, I had to pause the game and think, because in my head all I could think about was like, oh my god, that seems almost exactly like what Sephiroth is doing. Coming from the future to try and change the events of the past, and cutting away to Laguna every so often is obviously super similar to what we do with Zack in Rebirth. I don't know what came first, the ideas of 8 or wanting that to be the continuing of 7, but I would love to ask the developers what impact, if any at all, these things had to do with each other. Overall, I really loved the game, and I immediately wanted to play 9, but apparently the remake is supposed to be like any time now, so I decided I'd just wait for that. Alright. Next comes Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Elden Ring was my first Souls game. I'd heard of the series before and actually almost bought Dark Souls 3, but I think at the time I saw some gameplay and it was this super narrow hallway, like the most linear thing I'd ever seen, and decided nope, I was good. Open world was my thing back then. Any open world game I could get my hands on I wanted to try. Was not a fan of the linear stuff. But when I heard that Elden Ring was gonna be open world and you'd be able to go somewhere else and explore if you got stuck somewhere, and honestly even then I wasn't bought in until I saw that you could summon creatures. Not because of the difficulty of the game. Typically if there's ever an option, I'll pick a summoner or a necromancer, and it's funny because if I knew back then that the summons were only temporary and in certain situations, it probably would have taken me a lot longer to get Elden Ring, but by the time I figured it out, I was already in love with the game. So I didn't get Dark Souls 3 because of the linearness, but honestly I should have just got it, because literally the first thing I decided to do in Elden Ring was not move on until I beat the Erdtree Sentinel. It took me literally like 5 or 6 hours, but I tell you what, I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling I had, and I don't know if any other game will ever give me that feeling. Literally peak gaming moment. So back to the expansion. With like 40 hours of new content, I thoroughly enjoyed my time in the DLC. I remember I tried to make a new character, but I only made it to Liurnia, and I was way too excited to play, so I just went with my old character and jumped in. It was breathtaking walking out into the Graveview Plains, and speaking of looks and overall feel, I think all the areas were great to look at, and I don't know if it's just me, but while the map felt huge, it felt way more, I don't know if linear is the right word, but like focused. Yeah, there's a lot of open and empty space, but it feels like each area naturally flows into the next. And yes, you can still explore and find side stuff, but like the one dungeon where you finally reach the end, and then after you beat the boss, it opens up into the Abyssal Woods. Like that just felt amazing to me as a player. And I thought the bosses were pretty good. My favorite three were probably Midra, Renala, and Mesmer. Also, I just gotta say, I think Mesmer might be my favorite boss of all time. I don't think I've ever felt like that level of satisfaction from learning a character's moveset and finally beating it. From natural sitting down and playing the game point of view, I'd give the expansion a 10 out of 10. And yes, I do think it being a contender for Game of the Year is beyond dumb and makes no sense. One gripe I have with the DLC is the new weapons. I think the new weapons are awesome, and I admit it could have just been me missing them in my run, but it felt like there was actually like way more like cookbooks and random stuff than like actual weapons. When I first saw the trailer and all the new types, I thought we were gonna get like a insane amount, but yeah, just barely got any, it felt like. I think another slight disappointment I had was the size of the expansion. And don't get me wrong, I know the expansion is huge. 40 plus hours is basically a new game in and of itself. But the reason I was disappointed is because, and I don't remember if it was like a leak or an industry person saying it, but I remember seeing a tweet that said Miyazaki wasn't lying when he said it was the size of Limgrave, but he forgot to mention it was 5 Limgraves stacked on top of each other. I'm pretty sure that's like almost like word for word the exact tweet. And yes, again, the map is huge, but it wasn't 5 Limgraves, felt more like 2. But regardless, what my main disappointment was in the DLC was actually the lore, or rather the lack thereof. And I'm not saying we didn't learn anything, we actually learned a lot. And like I said earlier, Elden Ring was my first Souls game and From Software game. The amount of hours I spent learning the lore from YouTube videos might actually be longer than the time I actually spent in game, or at least it's probably close. Now, I've since learned there's always some unanswered questions in Souls games, but that didn't make it hurt any less for me in this one. I really wanted to see Godwyn and the Glowmite Queen, and if we never in my lifetime see what happens after the Frenzy Flame ending with Melina, I will be crushed. At least with Sony becoming a major shareholder in From Software's parent company, which, by the way, probably the best case scenario for that situation. Hopefully we'll get an Elden Ring movie or something that will fill in the gaps. Moving on to Star Wars Battlefront Collection. Oh, what could have been. A little background on me. Parents were divorced, so every summer I would have to spend basically the entire summer at their house, but they worked for like 8 hours a day and I was just by myself, and this game, and I think Sonic Adventures 2, is what I would spend all my time on. Literally every summer for 10 years I would spend hundreds of hours in Battlefront 1 and 2. And when I heard about this remaster, I was beyond hyped. Then I learned they were adding the multiplayer and my excitement was through the roof. I had never gotten to play online back in the day. I had the game on Xbox, but I never had Gold, I think it was called at the time. So being able to finally play with other people was like a dream come true. And then the game release, disappointment is an understatement. To be clear, the single player stuff was fine for me, just like I remembered it. However, the online was a disaster. I think there was like 3 dedicated online servers, no crossplay, and people couldn't even make their own lobbies. No one could play online, and if you somehow got into the game, it was like a rubber bandy laggy mess. By the time things got better, the game was dead. Editor Relic back again. I just looked at the Steam charts and it has like 47 player 24-hour peak, and now I just checked on PlayStation servers and there's literally only 16 people on. Both of those numbers combined is one short of fully filling a single lobby. It really is a shame, but anyways, I just had to say that. So back to the vid. It really is a shame, but I will say I still enjoy the single player, Galactic Conquest being my favorite game mode. This game was definitely the biggest swing from hype to disappointment to me for the year. So I replayed the main game on Final Fantasy mode, as well as the 2 DLCs for the first time, and this game is where I really wish I had like a games I played in 2023 video. The first time I played FF16, it was easily in my top 10 games of all time. Music was insane, combat felt great, and something I hadn't ever really played before, but the story is what hooked me through everything. I was so curious to know what was happening in the world and who everyone was. I read every single word of the active time lore, I was always checking it, but on second playthrough I began to realize a few things. One is that without the mystery of what was going to happen next in the story, made me focus way more on the combat. And I have to say, while the highs you get are amazing, the lows are painstakingly difficult to get through. I wouldn't personally call this game an action RPG. I think it's more just like an action game. The only upgrades are, buffs to damage numbers, health, and defense with your armor, and it's pretty linear in that sense. I would consider the icon abilities more like RPG elements, but you can literally use anything to kill 99% of the enemies. I don't really have an easy way to explain this, but I tend to be very efficient isn't the right word, but I guess efficient when I play video games. Like, for example, in Tears of the Kingdom, when I learned how to make a flying machine with 2 fans and one of the control sticks, I literally didn't use anything else for the other 50 hours I played. So For FF16, all I used was the abilities that would kill enemies the quickest. I didn't have joy in experimenting to do combos with different abilities in my second playthrough, and with me already knowing the story beats, it was really tough to get through. But then I get to the last chapter where you can access the DLCs, and let me tell you, I was sucked almost right back in time to how I felt about the game first playthrough. Echoes of the Fallen was short, pretty straightforward, but nonetheless solid. Rising Tides is where everything came together. Story was great, loved it. Leviathan was a hard boss, beautiful, but the best part is the introduction of the Leviathan icon abilities. Literally fixed combat for me. So a minute ago I said I play games like efficiently. What that translated to in this game was me using the most powerful abilities of the icons: Giga Flare, Judgment Bolt, Earthen Fury, Diamond Dust, basically all the super abilities. What was left for me to do while the abilities on cooldown was just Magic Burst, square triangle, square triangle, square triangle, dodge, square triangle. But what the Leviathan icon added to the game was a new fun and efficient way for combat while all the hard-hitting abilities were on cooldown. Serpent's Cry not only hits hard and deals crazy stagger, but it also lets you do it from range while allowing you to have the best mobility in the game, bar none. This was a great DLC. I loved it, and I hope it doesn't fall off for me on second playthrough like the base game did. Alright, next up is Persona 3 Reload. My first and only Persona game before this one was Persona 5 Royal, which was amazing by the way, unless you count Persona 5 Strikers, which I also enjoyed, but the gameplay is so different, I don't even know if I would consider it a Persona game besides the story. I was hyped for Reload. I wanted to play it when it was releasing in early February, but because it was so close to Rebirth, and I believe they announced, or there were leaks, that the Answer DLC was coming out later, so that made me want to hold off to complete the whole thing start to finish. This is a great game. I don't think it's quite as good as Royal, but Persona 3 Reload is amazing nonetheless. Music is damn near flawless. I really enjoyed the themes of loss, life, death. I like the game so much I actually blitzed through the main game and DLC in 100 hours in just barely over a month. The only drawback for the game, which was the same as Royal, was how repetitive it felt when you would just be doing the school stuff day after day after day. But just after the game was ending and I was getting tired of the school life, the DLC was like 99% combat focused. No school, so it was a great change of pace to keep me engaged. Don't think I really have much else to say on this one. All in all, just a great game. Nier Automata. You know, the only reason I played this game was because after I blitzed through Reload, I wanted to play Metaphor, but because I thought I might get burnt out on it, since I had just spent 3 hours a day on a turn-based RPG by the same developer for the last month, I decided I needed a change of pace. So I went to the PlayStation Store, and there was Nier Automata. I'd heard about the game for years, that it was amazing, one of the GOATs, but I never had the urge to try it myself. So I remember I looked up the game to see if it was a sequel, because I thought in my head I'd heard the phrase Nier franchise before. So I look and see that Replicant came before, but the gameplay looked really outdated, and I googled if Automata was a sequel or self-contained story. Turns out it's self-contained, but if you know the lore, it's much more enjoyable. So I decided to just YouTube the lore and what happens in Replicant. Also, I didn't know at the time there was a remaster of Replicant. I thought it was just the version from like a decade ago or whenever it came out. So anyways, I type in Nier lore and I'm met with this like, I think 4-hour video about how the whole Nier universe is a spin-off from a bad ending in another series called Drakengard, and I was just like, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? So I learned the lore, and then I learned what happens in Replicant and how in each successive playthrough you uncover things about the story that almost like completely flip everything on its head. And it's just so insane to me how everything you thought you knew can change just by learning another fact on like the next playthrough. This made me super hyped up because I wanted to know like how they would do that basically in Automata. So I start up the game and man, it was a journey. I feel like I've been pretty vague about story stuff in this video, maybe except like Rebirth, but I want to be extra careful with this one. If you have not played Automata, stop. Do not continue watching this section of the video until you've played. You are doing yourself a disservice by doing so. Please go play. So onto the game. Holy fuck, that shit was crazy. I don't even know where to start. Gameplay's fun, side missions are actually incredible for world building, and the music when I got to the theme park just touched my soul in a way I don't even know how to explain. Like I said, the main story is crazy, and learning new things with each playthrough is even crazier. Two biggest mindfucks for me were when 9S is talking to, I think it was Adam, and the word is muted. I thought it was him talking about like wanting to bang 2B, and then later you learn it was probably the word kill because she had been killing him the whole time. Just crazy. The other mindfucked, 2B just straight up dies in the beginning of Route C, or like the second half of the story basically. It was crazy, and then you top it off with the true ending scene where you fight the credits, like the developer names, and you could interpret it as the player going against the developer's wishes for the story to save 2B, 9S, and A2. This game was a masterpiece, and I will pre-order the next Nier game, no questions asked, whenever they do another one. Metaphor Refantazio. This is the game that should have been up there with Rebirth for me. Unfortunately, it's not, but the issue is I don't know why. And this question of why is the reason this video is not making it out in 2024. I love the two Persona games I played. The only downside I thought to them were the repetitiveness of the classroom stuff. Metaphor fixes this. You won't go more than a couple days without doing something different. And when you do go somewhere, you travel on the Gauntlet Runner where you can do different activities and even get in surprise battles. Not only that, but I think the combat system is better. The press turn system, choosing whether to use synthesis skills at the cost of 2 icons. Even the archetype system is an upgrade, allowing your party members to switch classes. Although I will say, while it's good and an upgrade, I don't think it's the greatest thing to ever happen, like I've seen other people say. A lot of the different types I say, while throwing air quotes, feel redundant to me. Now I will say I played the game in a hard mode, so maybe in New Game Plus difficulty all those classes become required and like super useful, so I'll leave it at that. So they make all these improvements, and maybe the biggest one for me is the setting. I'm a huge fantasy fan. Dragons, swords, magic. I will eat that shit up all day, 7 days a week. So with all these things going for it and a super high Metacritic score, why am I struggling to finish this game? I'm 80 hours in and on the last month of the game, I think. Like, pretty sure it's the last month. Unless there's some secret shit at the end. I've been thinking about it for a couple weeks now, and the only conclusion I can come up with is I'm going through one of my phases where I don't really enjoy video games, or it's just the story didn't really resonate with me. It's probably a little of both, and maybe a little burnout of the type of game, considering I bum rushed Persona 3 Reload, and that's kind of where I am with Metaphor. I try to do like one game day per real life day, but I will say a couple days ago I got Helldivers 2 because it was on sale, and that game is awesome. It's like the only game I've been wanting to play, so maybe it's not me going through my phase. Maybe, I don't know. I've genuinely thought about it for a while, and I don't really have an answer to why I'm struggling to get through Metaphor. I'll definitely finish it though, and maybe in a couple years they'll give it like the royal treatment and add an extra 30 hours. If so, I'll definitely play it again and hopefully enjoy the game like I know I should. And that concludes the games I played in 2024 and my thoughts on them. The only games I know about that I'm really looking forward to in 2025 are GTA 6 and Crimson Desert, and those probably won't come out to the end of the year if they even make it into 2025, so I should have time to work on my backlog. I want to do another Baldur's Gate 3 run with mods. I want to play Stellar Blade just because I saw they did a Nier collab. I also want to restart Hogwarts Legacy and actually finish that game. Definitely doing a hard mode playthrough for FF7 Rebirth now that I got the PS5 Pro. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot to mention this. Okay. Another reason, or like contributing factor to Metaphor not really gelling with me, is probably because it was literally destroying my PS5. So before I even begin, my PS5 was clean, no dust. I even took the fan out to make sure it was clean and good. And this issue didn't happen for any other game I had. And I tested a lot of games specifically for this. But with Metaphor, I basically couldn't play for more than like an hour, and sometimes as low as like 30-40 minutes, without getting the message PS5 is too hot, turn off console to prevent overheating. I didn't even know that this message existed, and I've had the PS5 since launch. Apparently, it's an issue that affects a super small percentage of users, as in there was like one Reddit thread with 30 comments. But the common thing that I notice is it seems to be all people with the launch PS5 disk drive model, or the PS5 fat model. So yeah, I finally got the PS5 Pro like 3-4 weeks ago now, because I was scared playing Metaphor was eventually going to ruin the console. And also because I'm betting that FF7 Part 3 is going to come out this generation for the anniversary, and I want to fully enjoy that game in the best way possible. possible when it launches. Anyways, that about does it for this video. It's the first time I've done a long video and giving my thoughts on things, so it was an interesting experience. I'm definitely gonna script next year's vid because I felt like a little all over the place, and I don't remember everything about the games because I just decided to do this like a month ago, so I don't have any notes or anything for the games, just kind of going off my memories of what I thought. So yeah, this year I will, once I beat a game, I will write down in my notes my thoughts and save them for the end of the year. If you watched this far, thank you, and let me know in the comments what games you played this year, or if you have any recommendations for me based off what I've played, or if you have thoughts about my thoughts on the games I talked about. And if no one ever sees this, at least I can go back in the future and see what I played and my thoughts at the time. And that's about it.